I'm Dr. Erin Mires, and this is Leading with Intuition, a podcast for the Type A perfectionist woman who knows society needs a reboot and is capable of making it happen. We are redefining success so that we have a balance of energy where work-life integration creates happiness instead of anxiety. A balance of energy that allows the future generations of our society to know the meaning of acceptance without the pressure to conform and achieve. That's what this podcast is all about. So sit back, relax, make sure you follow, download, review, and let's begin. Meditation has been shown to be an effective way to improve mood, reduce stress, and enhance cognitive function. But what if I told you that there's a connection between meditation and quantum physics? Hi, I'm Dr. Erin Mires, and in this podcast, I want to show you the benefits of combining two things that people really don't usually think about together: quantum physics and meditation. It sounds strange, but if you're a lifelong learner like me, then just stick around because it might be just the change in your life you need to give you a new perspective on meditating. So we're going to start off by talking about quantum paradigms. Is there a way that we can harness our quantum potential? And this is really important to think about because as quantum physics becomes more and more mainstream, and we're realizing that some of the old paradigms of physics are no longer relevant to our new understanding of the world and the universe, there are things that we need to change in our society in order to really harness the true potential that we have as human beings in this interconnected world. So I need to first start off by giving credit to Dr. Teresa Bullard. She has a great video series on Gaia called Mystery Teachings, and the first episode, Consciousness and the Quantum Paradigm, is where I'm pulling a lot of this data from, in addition to just my own personal experience. So let's talk about this a little bit. How do we really harness our quantum potential? Well, Thomas Kuhn, who is a physicist, historian, and author of The Structure of the Scientific Revolution, he was around between 1922 and 1996 and said, when paradigms change, the world changes with them. And so when you think about the fact that he was around from 1922 to 1996, was there a massive shift in scientific revelations at that time? There were a few, but it's not something that we would necessarily call a revolution. But now what we are experiencing, almost since Thomas's time, he was really ahead of his own time, is this revolution, this evolution of scientific paradigms. And so we as a world need to change with these shifting paradigms. So with a paradigm shift, we really need to focus on retraining our old way of thinking and living away from the programming that was used for the old paradigms. And we really need to tune in our way of thinking with our new reality. So there are really two main paradigms right now. So the first one is known as the Newtonian paradigm. This is the scientific paradigm that our culture has grown up in, has evolved into. And the Newtonian paradigm is really, there are four main components of it, so to speak, and that is determinism, separatism, reductionism, and materialism. So if you think about our world today, everybody is very determined, especially in the Western world, to make things happen, to get to the top. We need to be the best of the best. But with that is this separatism. We will step all over each other to get to the top. We are different than people of other races and people of other genders, than people of non-binary genders, right? There's this separatism that occurs in this Newtonian paradigm. And then reductionism. And so when we do not feel that someone is worthwhile, we reduce them to something less than human. So this determinism, this separatism, this reductionism, and then through that all comes this materialism. Because if we can't have it all when we rise to the top, then we can't have anything, right? That's kind of this way of thinking. And it's created this polarity, this, we are all different from each other type of mentality. And it is awful. Let's just be honest. I even hate saying it, because if you were to just take a voice clip of what I just said, you would think it was a horrible, nasty human being, right? Which is not the case. I actually live in this new quantum paradigm. I believe in this new quantum paradigm. It is the way in which I actually grew up because of the circumstances surrounding my youth. I was fortunate to have been exposed to the quantum paradigm early on. This Newtonian paradigm is just, quite frankly, disgusting. And so let's shift and think about this then from this old school, so to speak, perspective. This Newtonian paradigm, and it encourages this separation. It fuels that ego and greed. Everything is isolated and reduced to individual parts which have to function in this linear, logical, and clockwork way. Things in the Newtonian paradigm, they need to be predictable and controllable, and anybody who's like me, who tries to control their anxiety by creating all these structures and systems that put everything into a box, you have seen the negative light of the Newtonian paradigm just with your own personal experience with anxiety. Instead, when we shift to this quantum paradigm and we let go of the fact that we can't control everything, it reconnects us with spirit, and it reconnects us to choice. And so this quantum paradigm that I keep referring to, the four main components of it, compared to the four components of the Newtonian paradigm, which were determinism, separatism, reductionism, and materialism. For the quantum paradigm, they are complementarity, contextual, conscious, and connected. The 4 C's. So today, just for the sake of time, we are only going to talk about the complementary component, this concept of complementarity. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, let's start off by just summarizing the quantum paradigm first. So the quantum sorry, jumping all over myself. The quantum paradigm, what it states is that the universe is participatory, meaning our choices, even our thoughts, they matter. And when we shift our way of thinking and our way of living to fall into the quantum paradigm, it puts the power back in our hands. We no longer have to fight to get to the top. Instead, when we reorient our ways of thinking toward this quantum paradigm, the doors to new possibilities open wide. And we're going to discuss why over the course of the next 15 or 20 minutes. So the main question is, can we truly reprogram or rewire our perceptions after hundreds of years of this genetic and social conditioning under the Newtonian paradigm? And the answer is an absolute yes. But what it is going to take is a combination of the correct concepts as well as daily practices to make this shift. So what are those correct concepts and daily practices? We'll get into those in a moment. So when enough of us make this shift to have those daily practices in our lives, then we can help guide and support the collective shift into this quantum paradigm. And there's a reason that we are all here and alive during this time, and that is to help make this shift. I heard a statistic just a few weeks ago that said that for a collective shift to occur around the world, only 2% of the population need to follow it in order for the tipping point to occur. So 2% of the population of the entire world need to get on board with shifting our daily actions to this quantum paradigm and starting to help guide and support others to do the same, and we will have the shift. So the first component of the quantum paradigm is this concept of complementarity. And what this is it's basically the uncertainty principle. It's impossible to precisely measure two observables that are tied together as complementary pairs. Now I know, that sounds just like a bunch of scientific jargon, right? It's impossible to precisely measure two observables that are tied together as complementary pairs. So let's break this down. We're going to break it down Barney style. Don't worry. So let's think of it from a couple of different examples. We'll start with movement. So a complementary pair, that's the main component of this principle, right? So this uncertainty principle. A particle's position in space and its momentum through space are a complementary pair. So think of that as, you can even think of it as you right now in this moment. So your position in space and your momentum, the speed at which you are currently moving, are complementary to each other. If we know exactly where you are or where a particle is, then we won't be able to know anything about the momentum where you're moving. Because in order to know precisely where every component of you is in this exact moment, you can't be moving, right? As soon as you move, as soon as you have that momentum, then we can't know exactly where you are because you're constantly shifting. So that's this concept of complementarity. If we know exactly where you are, we can't know how fast you're moving because we have to know exactly where you are in that exact moment, which technically means that to precisely measure it, you aren't moving at all. Now, on the flip side, if you're moving, we can't know exactly where you are because you're constantly shifting. Make sense? Hopefully. So if we know exactly where a particle is, then we won't be able to know anything about its momentum, and its momentum relates to its mass, so its weight, its speed, the direction it's moving, or vice versa. Right? So vice versa, meaning if we know exactly what the momentum is, we can't know exactly where that particle is. Okay. So what in the world does this have to do with me? Right? What does this have to do with me? Why are we talking about particles and uncertainty principles? Well, when we think about complementarity from a human perspective, we need to ask ourselves two questions. So where are we right now? And where are we going? So if we know exactly where we are right now, then we won't have total clarity on where we are going. Because suddenly, if we stop moving and we focus on exactly where we are right now, we have an infinite amount of possibilities as to where we could possibly go. We've got 360 degrees just around us in one direction, not to mention an entire sphere. We could jump up instead, right? So we have an infinite number of possibilities as to where we could possibly go. On the flip side of that, if we know where we're going, we can't know exactly where we are right now. In order to know exactly where we are right now, we have to pause. And as soon as we pause and we stop moving, then we again have an infinite number of possibilities as to where we could go. Does that make sense? So we have to stand completely still to know where we are. And if we know where we are, then we have several options on where we go from here. And so if we think about this from the perspective of our daily lives, going to work, being a leader, being a woman, being a spouse, being a mother, whatever the case may be, we always seem to be going. When do we ever stop? And I know the answer for me is never, unless I put it on my calendar and I say, this is my time to sit, to literally sit down and to have a moment, let alone to meditate. I know we're going to talk about meditation here today, and obviously this is all coming and tying together, and you'll start to see the threads of meditation coming into play here. But for me, meditation gives me anxiety. You mean I have to stop and close my eyes and not do anything? But that means, suddenly my head is spinning with all the things that I have to do if I stop and think about it, right? But that's just it. If I stop for a moment, then my head starts thinking about all the things that I have to do. because suddenly there is an infinite number of possibilities open to me as to what I could do next. And so my mind starts thinking about what I have to do, or what at least I think I have to do. Because do I really need to go grocery shopping today? No, we could absolutely skim by with what is in our pantry right now. But would it make me more comfortable to go grocery shopping? Sure. But when I pause for a moment and think about it, no, I don't have to go grocery shopping. No, I don't have to do this. No, I don't have to do that. I have all of these infinite amount of possibilities. And so it's so important for us as human beings to stop and think about where we are right now and to just have a moment and absorb it and live in it and sit in it. What are my emotions right now? How am I feeling? Checking in with our bodies. Is there pain? Is there movement? Is there freedom in my body? If you just stop and take in for a moment the children that are around you, they're never going to be this young again. That just gives me chills and gets me emotional just thinking about it, right? Just pause and live in it and sit in that moment. That gives us perspective of the infinite amount of possibilities and really makes us realize that what we think we have to do may not necessarily be what we should be feeling we have to do. Instead, we may feel that we have to play with our children, that we have to accept this time, that we have to take time for ourselves, for self-care, because I am hurting. My mental health isn't exactly where it needs to be. At the time of this recording, we're in the middle of the Olympics, and just a few days ago, Simone Biles took herself out. And granted, this morning she went ahead and did the individual beam routine, but she took herself out because she didn't trust her body, because she was able to sit still for long enough to realize that her mental health wasn't where it needed to be, and she was risking her entire career and potentially her life if she were to go out there and compete. So Simone Biles stopped. She stopped to sit in it and to know exactly where she was. And that gave her the possibility of withdrawing. Something that if she hadn't stopped to think and really check in with herself, she probably never would have even considered. Because it's never been done before. And Carrie Strug came out and said that she pushed through and she had that career-ending accident, that career-ending injury when she pushed through, when she should have done exactly what Simone did. But at that time, no one accepted mental health enough for her to even consider stopping and checking in and realizing that that was a possibility. Okay, so hopefully we're starting to get the idea of this, right? Let's talk about it from one other perspective. So if we know where we're going and how fast we're going, we'll never know exactly where we are because we're moving. So our position keeps changing, right? Our momentum is good in life, but it's also good to stop and to know exactly where we are. Let's look at this from the time perspective. So we talked about the complementarity of movement. Now let's talk about the complementarity of time. So energy is related to vibration. All things move at a certain rate, and that rate of vibration is known as frequency. Frequency and energy are one part of the complementary pair, and inversely is this connection to time. So we have frequency and energy on one hand and time on the other. So if we know the precise moment that an event takes place, then the amount of energy contained in that event becomes uncertain. Catching that? Meaning all energy becomes accessible. So if we know the precise moment that an event takes place, all energy becomes accessible. Conversely, if we know exactly how much energy something has, then we'll never be able to know exactly when it occurred, meaning that all time is potentially accessible, giving us access to eternity. Okay, let's break this down Barney style a little bit more. So what does this have to do with human beings? What does this have to do with me? Well, we need to stop and pause and think, when am I? Am I stuck in the past? Am I reliving all of the mistakes that I made in the past, or a past relationship, or a past incident, a past job? A lot of human beings inherently do this. We get stuck just thinking about the past. Or the opposite. We get stuck projecting into the future. I certainly have moments in my memory in the past where they are so vivid and I can relive them because of the emotions that were tied to them, right? There's this incident in 3rd grade, and this just gives you an idea of how much of a perfectionist I've been since the time of childhood. But there's this incident in the 3rd grade, why it is so stuck in my memory. I mean, it's just absurd. But I was so torn and emotional about it. So the teacher had one of those spinning color wheels. And I remember we had just done the dark one, which was colored in with markers. And when it's colored in with markers, it's black, right? It's when you spin it, it's black because all the colors mesh together and it creates this black wheel. And then she had colored it in with crayon, so it was a lot lighter on a second one. And she asked, okay, well, what color is this going to be? So I raised my hand and I'm like, tapping my foot, waiting to be called on, and she calls on me and I say black, because obviously we just learned this lesson, all colors meshing together are black. Well, it was actually incorrect. It was white, because the colors were so lightly colored in that they created white in the spinning color wheel. And getting it wrong, knowing I had the right answer and then getting it wrong, was so incredibly devastating to me that I still relive that moment. Isn't that horrible? That is how stuck in the past I am in that particular moment. And anytime I have anxiety about getting something incorrect or not knowing the right answer, I go back to that memory. So I get stuck in the past in that memory. Now, conversely, the majority of my time, I project into the future. I think about what I have to be doing next, what I should be doing next with my business, what I should be doing next with my kids. You know, my daughter can now write letters out if we spell words for her, and she's starting to be able to sound it out. She's 4. And so I have to know, I'm like, okay, what's next? I don't know what else to teach her in order to properly prepare her for kindergarten, right? What else do I have to do? And so I'm projecting into the future, thinking about always the next step. What's the next step for my kids? What are we having for dinner? What do I need to do? What's the next email I need to write? So that's where I spend the majority of my time. And so when our minds are ruminating either on the past or the future, we can sense how much energy it takes up. Only when we are in the now does our precise measurement of time occur. Does that make sense? So when our minds are ruminating on the past, we can sense how much energy it takes up. So when or ruminating on the future. So when I'm ruminating on the future, I think about how much energy, oh my gosh, I'm going to need so much energy. I better have an energy drink because I need to get through this day and there's so much that I have to do and blah, 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 blah. So I can sense the amount of energy that must occur. But only when I stop and be in the now can I know the exact timing. And when I know the exact time, can no longer sense the amount of energy. Right? Does that make sense? So in order to calm my anxiety about how much energy I need to exert in order to get everything done that I need to get done throughout the day, because I'm so focused on the future, only when I stop and sit in this exact moment of time can I calm myself, because I no longer am able to sense the amount of energy. I'm hoping all of this is coming together, right? So then, in that moment, when we know the precise time, that's when limitless amount of energy becomes available to us. So if we continually live in the past or ruminate about the future or ruminate about the past or project into the future, we are never going to have the amount of energy that we need. It is only when we stop and we sit in this moment of time do we have access to all the energy. That's why it's so important to just sit still, to calm our minds, to access the energy again. So what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with humans? So the question to ask ourselves in this case is, what is my energy level? Since energy is directly related to frequency, when we increase our frequency, we raise our energy level. If we bring our energy to one singular state, attuned to one frequency, that's when our sense of time disappears. The quantum paradigm says that all possibilities and all probabilities exist at once, and until a choice is made. So we have an unlimited amount of possibilities until we make a choice as to what we're going to do. At that moment, when the choice is made, we manifest that one possibility and all others disappear. It's kind of like when you think back to the momentum, where if we stop and sit still for a moment, we have an unlimited amount of possibilities in terms of where we are going to move next. But as soon as we start to move, those other choices fall away. It's not until we stop moving again, even if just for a moment, that we can shift. And so think about it from that same perspective, right? We have all this unlimited amount of choices to make until we make the choice, until we make one choice as to which one of those possibilities we are going to take, at which time all the other possibilities disappear. We have to stop to re-access those possibilities again. Okay, so here's another example of this. This is a really cool experiment that I just find absolutely fascinating. And of course, my nerd self is coming out here. And this is known as the wave-particle duality. So you may or may not be familiar with this, but light, like light coming from a light bulb or the sun or whatever, light behaves as both a wave and a particle. So when scientists back in the day, about 100 years ago, set up experiments to see if light was a wave or a particle, what they found is if they set up the experiment to see if light was a wave, it was a wave. And when they set up an experiment to see if light was a particle, it was a particle. So what exactly does this mean? What does this have to do with me? Well, it's as though the quantum knows what we're looking for, and it provides the answer. So if we're looking for a wave, we get a wave. If we're looking for a particle, we get a particle. So if we take action in such a way to gain momentum, similar to a wavelength, the forward and upward mobility and motion, then we will have that. If we take action to be a particular goal or moment that we are trying to reach, we will no longer have that momentum. We will only see the particulars, the goal, and that moment. And so this is why the habits that we create to create ultimately momentum are so much more successful than if we just set a goal and reach it. It is so important to not focus on the goal, but instead to focus on the habits that allowed you to reach the goal. Because when we do that, we act in such a way to gain momentum so that we will continue to reach beyond that goal. Whereas if we only set a goal and only focus on that goal, that is all we will get. We won't move beyond that goal. And so think about it from like the perspective of a race. So let's say I'm training for a half marathon and all I'm focused on is this half marathon. I'm going to do this half marathon. I'm going to finish this half marathon. You know, that's just the way it is. Whether or not I finish it, I stop there. I did it. I reached my goal. Or, dang it, I ran it and I failed. You know, I had an injury and it didn't happen. Either way, it's done. It's over. But if I focus, okay, I want to accomplish a half marathon. I want to run a half marathon race. What do I need to do to get there? And I focus on the habits that I need to change in my life to get to that point. Then even after I complete the half marathon, I'm going to continue those habits. I'm going to continue to run 5 to 7 days a week, whatever my training plan may be. You know, I may not be on a training plan anymore, but I've now created the habits of eating healthier, establishing a solid exercise routine, and I go beyond that. I go to my next half marathon or my next 10K, or maybe even I start to train for a marathon. So we need to think about it in that perspective. So the quantum knows what we're looking for and it provides the answer. If we're only looking for one thing and that's to reach a goal, it will provide us with that opportunity. But if instead we say, I want to create the daily habits and changes in my life in order to do whatever that goal may have been stated as, then the quantum will provide us with the opportunity to have the habits and the lifestyle changes that need to occur in order to reach that and go beyond. Okay, so that is the end of complementarity. And I'm going to stop it there, but in terms of the explanation of the quantum physics behind it. But I want to go back to each of these components of complementarity that we discussed. So we talked about movement. If we know exactly where we are now, then we have unlimited possibilities of where to go. And if we know exactly where we are going, then we can't know exactly where we are now. And when it comes to time, if we know the precise moment that an event takes place, we have the exact, we will never know the exact amount of energy it takes. If we know exactly how much energy it takes, then we will not be able to say exactly when it occurs. And then finally, the wave-particle duality, where the quantum provides us with whatever we ask for it. So think about that. So when we talked about time, when we talked about movement, what was the commonality there? The commonality is to pause and to know exactly where we are now, both our location as well as the time. Because when we do that, we have unlimited access to possibilities in terms of where we are going now, and unlimited access to energy. But it's not until we stop and we stop ruminating on the past and projecting into the future that we are able to access those and realize how much more capable we truly are, how many more possibilities there are to accomplish something. So stop, pause, sit in it. And all of that is why we need meditation, because it allows us the opportunity for just 5 to 10 minutes a day, even start small, to sit in it and to have access to all of the possibilities and all of the energy. And once we stop and sit in it, that's when we need to think about that wave-particle duality. What is it that we're looking for? And instead of thinking about a particular goal, what are the actions and the daily habits we can take? The quantum will then provide us with the possibilities and the energy. So that is how quantum physics relates to meditation. And so I'm going to go ahead and end here, But I want to let you know about something else that I'm going to be doing on this podcast now. After getting feedback from several individuals and kind of asking about this idea that I had, I've received a resounding yes answer in response. And that is, so once a week I'm going to provide content, just like what I did today, where we talk about something or I interview someone, and it all is going to relate to this concept of leading with intuition, right? Leading with this balance of masculine and feminine energy and really being in tune with ourselves so that we can show up as our whole selves to work and in life. And, but on top of that, I want us to be able to schedule in time to stop and be in the now. And so I'm going to provide you with an excuse to do that by having a meditation that is recorded on this podcast that will also come out once a week. So I'm going to try to make it earlier in the week where the content podcast comes out, and then a little bit later in the week where the meditation podcast comes out. Because it's usually by the end of the week that we really need to stop for a moment and calm ourselves and reconfigure our mind and our energy and think about all those possibilities and all the energy that is accessible to us. And now I am stumbling over my words again. So with that, thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and ask me all the questions. If something really confused you, if it didn't make sense, if you would like additional examples, I'd be happy to provide them. So go ahead, if you're on Spotify, you can record a question directly to me, or if you want to reach out to me directly, my email address is hello@erinmires.com. That's HELLO@ERINMIRES.com. So I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.